Conference realignment is a major topic right now, just over a month away from the start of the season, and the smoke is real. It's obvious that FSU has been looking for a way out of the ACC for some time now, and the granite right still isn't up until 2036. But there's still a way for FSU to leave the conference or to help to dissolve the ACC overall. FSU, despite some down years over the last decade or so, is still a highly relevant national brand in college football and is the top brand in the ACC despite recent success from Clemson. FSU games, even on a down year, have the highest ratings on average in the entire conference, and I've even seen a few polls that FSU is one of the more rapidly growing fan bases in the entire country. Along with FSU, you also have a lot of other major brands such as Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, that are essentially carrying the revenue of the whole conference, and it's just not fair that that type of revenue generated by essentially four schools is evenly distributed to all the other ACC teams. You can't tell me that it's fair that Duke gets the same amount of revenue that FSU does when Duke has essentially done nothing. Now, Miami hasn't been super relevant over the last couple decades either, but they're still much more of a household name in college football than, say, Duke or Wake Forest. It's been reported that FSU and Clemson alone bring in about 30% of the conference's overall revenue and only get about half of that back. The math just ain't mathing. The fact is that college football is an industry, and just like any other industry, it takes money to make money, especially in today's world. When you compare that to our in-state rivals over there in Gainesville that make significantly more annual revenue than we do just because they belong to a better conference, it's just silly. FSU has more number one rankings. FSU had a better 2022 season. FSU has had a more recent national championship and a Heisman Trophy winner. So clearly accolades and accomplishments are only a piece of the puzzle here. Being held down and given significantly less resources every year and being expected to compete with SEC brands like Florida and LSU is a tall task. This essentially affects the program from top to bottom. Less money to pay or retain coaches, less money to invest in stadium or facility upgrades, less money for recruiting budgets or NIL payments. Not to mention, just right off the top, ACC broadcasting is terrible. It's so bad. Watching a game on the ACC network is usually really hard to do. The camera work is shoddy. I personally don't love most of the announcers. And don't even get me started on the officiating this conference because it's a pure joke. Just look at the 2022 NC State game. All this to say, FSU and FSU fans would love nothing more than to get out of this conference, and it's been reported that the Big Ten and the SEC would be interested. The Big Ten would love to add the Florida market to their conference, and the SEC would love to add to theirs. Of course, the ACC commissioner is trying to hold on everything he can to keep the conference together, and he was really given an impossible job when he took over. But if anything, his work is just postponing the inevitable, especially when you're unwilling to really acknowledge the issues at hand and offer any real solutions to them. It was reported a few months ago that FSU was in talks with a few other schools, and basically, to my understanding, if 8 schools joined the league together, that would then forfeit the grant of rights and dissolve the entire conference. The issue that lies there is you can only get that many teams to agree and join you to do this if those 7 teams feel like they have a better landing spot when they leave the conference. And I don't know that the Pac-12 or the Big 12 are any better than the ACC, so that means either the Big 10 or the SEC has to be open to accept all 7 other schools for this type of thing to work. This became even more difficult when the ACC came out and said that they would do unequal revenue sharing based on performance, which sounds great on the surface, but even at that point, it wouldn't bridge the gap between us and another SEC team, for example, so it's essentially a Band-Aid on a broken arm. Your deficit to other SEC teams is somewhere around $30 million, and this unequal revenue sharing will only add up to about $5 to $6 million extra per year. There were some concerns about FSU getting into the Big Ten due to certain academic standards, but now Brett McMurphy has come out and said that while AAU membership is a big preference for Big Ten schools, it's not necessarily a requirement. So this even further opens a path for FSU to the Big Ten, and SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey has come out and said that they would only want to take teams that fit their geographic footprint. So it doesn't sound like they're wanting to expand the conference all over the country, and FSU certainly fits that mold. It doesn't get much more southeastern than the state of Florida. They already have UF, so it definitely makes sense to add FSU and Miami into that group as well and keep the in-state rivalries here all in the same conference. Now, short of dissolving the entire conference with the majority 8 teams, there still has to be a price to pay for leaving the conference. For starters, there's a $120 million fee for just leaving, but then you would also have to buy back the media rights, which is about $300 million. So we're essentially looking at $400 to $500 million to accomplish this, and it's hard to see that how other conferences, while wanting to add brands like FSU or Clemson, just don't want to deal with that kind of price tag. It's also been put out that FSU would try to renegotiate the buyout down to $300 million, and then pay through installments of $30 million a year for the next 10 years. Though I really don't get what this accomplishes, especially short term. Yes, you get out of the ACC, and maybe as a long term fix, this would work, but this still leaves you with marginally less revenue than your opponents, which is the core issue here. It also sounds like technically our media rights aren't actually owned by the ACC, but they're actually owned by ESPN. So if you were to go to the SEC, the ESPN would still, in theory, own your media rights, and maybe you can avoid paying the grant of rights buyout and just pay the 120 to leave the conference and be done with it all. The ins and outs of all this, how it all works, contracts, buyouts, loopholes, it's honestly very confusing. But if this is the case about the ESPN and the SEC, it seems kind of like a no-brainer to go there rather than the Big Ten. Now here's where I'm torn as my own personal preference. The SEC just sounds right for geographic reasons, obviously. I think it can also boost the rivalry we have with Florida and bring on some new rivalries rather than Wake Forest or Pitt. We already have some SEC teams on the schedule. We obviously open up the 23 season against LSU. And then we have Georgia and Alabama on the schedule in a couple years. These types of games will also fare better for traveling purpose, obviously. It's of course a much quicker and cheaper drive to go to Alabama or Georgia than it would be to go, say, Nebraska or Michigan. However, I believe that we might actually be able to bring in a little bit more money in the Big Ten. I think their TV deal is a little bit better than the SEC's. I also think some of the Big Ten games could become instant classics. Tell me a whiteout game at Penn State or going into the Horseshoe to play Ohio State wouldn't be legendary. Now, I'm also a fan of cold weather, unlike most, so I'm a bit biased, I guess. But either way, I'll take whichever one we can get, whether it's the Big Ten or the SEC, just get me out of the ACC. You get better TV deals, more annual revenue, better games on the schedule. It all sounds good to me. Now, the grant of rights still has over 10 years left, and most people, myself included, think that FSU is out of the conference within the next 5. And it sounds like it could be even sooner than that. Negotiations and meetings seem to be happening quickly right now, so maybe we even get something within the next year or two, which would be great. I know FSU has to come out and officially announce their intent to leave by August 15th, or they're at least committed to remain in the conference until the 2025 season. So it's possible we could see some crazy stuff happen in the next few weeks or so, but let me know your thoughts. How soon do you think all this can or will happen, and would you prefer to go to the Big Ten or the SEC? Let me know in the comments, like, subscribe, and let's talk Noles.